For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to The Gist on StratNews Global. Good evening, I'm Surya Gangadharan and welcome to another edition of The Gist. This evening I have with me Dr. Gyal Lo. He's a Canada-based Tibetan academic, sociologist, who was teaching in China for many years, in fact in Yunnan University. And he has been active in his years in Canada to push the case of China's colonization of Tibet, especially its cultural policies that are trying to rob Tibetans of their own heritage. He has also been active in the UN in terms of underscoring China's human rights policies in Tibet that are trying to marginalize the Tibetan language, marginalize Tibetans and other human rights abuses. So Dr. Gyal Lo, welcome, glad to have you.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Dr. Gyal Lo, let's begin first of all with a little background from you. I've kind of summed it up here.
Okay, sure.
But as academic based in China, a Tibetan academic based in China, how was it working there? Could you briefly give us a sense of how it was?
As an academic, Tibetan academic in China, recently, particularly since the second term of the Xi Jinping's era, there are many policies and academic research got very restricted. And also the other policy as well. For example, they shut down all the diaspora Tibetan office from the county level to the central government level. That's all those carried out after this 2018, which means the second term of the Xi Jinping. Yeah.
So you would say there's been a hardening of policy on Tibet?
Yes, some of their policies are hidden. They have two types of the policy: hidden policy and the policies on the table. So the hidden policies are implemented over the last 6 decades. And the policy on the table, they're playing the game. And in the policy document, when you read it, there's no problem. But when they implemented the document down to the ground, then they play the double game. So because nobody watching it, how they implemented the policy in the way it's correct or not. Nobody watching it.
Yeah. So
the local authority implemented in the way that they want. That's the situation. The hidden policy, like education and the colonial boarding school and economic and the language in education policy, language in government system policy, and the cultural activity carried out by the collective of the Tibetan people. They have all kind of restrictions. Those restrictions are in the 3 levels: material restrictions and the structural restrictions, and some of them we have the sanctional restriction. So all those 3 types of sanctions restrictions are carried out with their policies. Yeah.
You made an interesting remark about China's colonial school system in Tibet. Could you describe exactly what this is and how it works?
Before, until 1995, even my people, the Tibetan people, we couldn't realize what is China's ideological conspiracy of it. So since 1995, we realized something wrong. The teachers are teaching, students are studying, schools are running. But our society is not in the progress.
Yeah.
So then we really think about what's wrong with our education. So we realize then the education has a problem, has a problem with the curriculum. We analyze the curriculum, we analyze the policy, and then I think that I'm the first person who academically defined China's school education in Tibet. It's a colonial boarding school, because I applied the internationally accepted scientific framework of the 7 stages of the colonization to the Tibetan society. It perfectly fits the Tibetan situation, particularly the education system. That's the first. The second is curricula. They limited our culture and the knowledge in the curriculum system only from 15 to 25%. Those 2 trends allow me to identify the education is under the fall of colonization. So I call the colonial education system. Yeah.
So basically, they're not teaching Tibetan culture and language as they should, and the focus is more on learning Mandarin, Chinese ways, and Chinese thinking.
Yes, earlier years, they gave us a little bit of space, but since Xi Jinping took a position in China's central government, then those opportunity and the chance are completely removed from the system of the education. What they demand is one culture, one nation, one language as a China. So under that kind of a notion, we don't have any space for our cultural language being practiced. So this is I think, clearly we can see this is China's top ideology of the ideological conspiracy that's been implementing and practicing over the 7 decades in Tibetan society. So our kids who were in school system almost produced as a cheap labor. So before I claimed this, before China claimed saying we liberated Tibet as a poor people and putting them as a master of their own society, my conclusion is now they weaponize the education, the school system to turn our 4th generation as a cheap labor. So that's what they did.
I now want to jump to the United Nations and the Universal Periodic Review. Now, just briefly for our viewers, the UN carries out a human rights examination of its members every 4 years or so. And this time it's China's turn. January, China is going to come under scrutiny. The question is for its treatment of Tibetans and Uyghurs and others also. The question is, how rigorous is this review of the human rights situation in China, and how transparent is China when it comes to giving details of how Tibetans are treated? Dr. Gyal Lo, you've been dealing with this for some time. What is your sense?
Yeah, that's the first time for me I attend those UN Geneva Summit last year. It is very clear. As a village boy born in Tibet, in east part of Tibet, all the way up to last year's Geneva Summit, I saw how and what the level of the deep things that China lying. When I got the chance meeting with those committee members, I told them the reason we're having such great challenges in convincing those international institutions and organizations, because the China's repetitive lying became a truth in with those international community organizations and institutions. So now it's a time for us to explain the truth of the situation inside Tibet. For example, particularly China's delegation lied about the number of the students in the boarding, number of the boarding schools. They minimize the Tibetan, only refer to Tibetan autonomous region. That clearly for us is only one third of the Tibetan region. What we're claiming is entire Tibetan, which we have Wizang, Kham, and Amdo.
Yeah.
So China divided those regions into their 4 provinces, but they exclude those numbers.
I see.
So they exclude 2/3 of the population's data for the education report. So of course there is a gap, information, statistical gap there. So this is, I think that China intentionally playing the game, same as before. I think at this time we have our own people who have a deep, almost 30 years experience working in the education system. So now it's a time to show the truth, to justify the truth.
Does the UN system allow a powerful country like China to be questioned? Do they insist on proof? Can they send a fact-finding team into Tibet?
They did. They asked committee asked many questions to the Chinese delegation, but the number of the key questions are not be answered because they don't have answers. They don't have answer. So if they don't have answer, there's no answer, obviously. So when they answered, which is lying, there are false statistic information there, and also sometimes they exaggerated the situation where the reason why they put this kids in the boarding school. They say, oh, Tibetan family, the community are living too far from the school system. It's obvious. For me, I've personally been those schools, place. I know how far the distance between school and a community. That's not the reason. China have such economic power. They can build the school beside every village. But they did not do that. You know why? They wanted to use the school as a weapon to erase the Tibetan culture completely, to assimilate Tibetan young generation that makes Tibetan has no any ability or capacity to do the resistance in the future. That's what they're doing in the school system.
So can, say this time, when there is general international sentiment against China, do you think you'll be more successful in trying to persuade UN member nations to, put China on the mat?
Of course, I think if you don't increase the pressure on China, then they will do whatever they have, the plan they make, right? So you're letting the free water flowing everywhere. But if UN and the member of the UN country who join together very strongly to increase the pressure on China, then that will have a good result, I think. Because according to the Chinese personality and the cultural characteristic, they listen to the power and the rich. They ignore the poor people and the weaker group. Always. When you see the reviews of the history of the China's culture, the way it is. So I learned this. You know, when I was in my university, when I was teaching, I had the chance to travel to Beijing with a Chinese provincial officer. On the train, we got this interesting argument. He says, if you don't know the cultural figure, Chinese figure, you will have no food to eat. But if you don't know your Tibetan cultural figure, you still can be survived. So what do you mean there? You know, every angle of the life, in the daily life basis, you face this kind of dilemma all the time. So China is such big country. They have a power. Now they're using their education system as a weapon. They weaponize the school system to annihilating the other minority culture as well. For example, when I was in Yunnan, I traveled to the border area between Thailand, Myanmar, and the Yunnan's place. There are multiple ethnic minorities. They're also facing the similar challenges, but they give up the hope. You know, then again, when you take a look at the Tibet, Mongolia, and the Uyghur, those minority region are not a simple minority group. For example, Tibetan, when they joined China, we signed the 17-point agreement. We're not just simply join them. We have a roots, long historical roots. You cannot simply pull it out and then stop it. So that's the way I see it now.
So what do you expect will happen during this review?
The review needed to be able to identify everywhere, everything they lined, needed to pull out. Then let them correct it, and then let them change it.
You think that will happen?
If international community stand together strongly to increase the pressure, they will do it because they have to join the international community, right? So those pressures are very powerful. They listen to power. So I think, based on my knowledge of the China, they will listen.
I think you're being optimistic. But let me go forward. Assuming China's cultural colonization continues, you know, and do you expect that this could deepen some of the security issues that India is facing vis-a-vis China? It's very clear what China been planning for the long term. When you in Tibet, when you have a chance, opportunity to practice Tibetan language and culture, then Tibet, the border with India is safe. Can you imagine if we let them succeed, the colonial boarding school system in Tibet, then the China will don't need to deploy the Chinese people to the border area. And that border areas, the Tibetan people, the young generation will be supporting China, became a Chinese. So then that means the real border and the real power, you're going to face it. So if we let them, we strongly be able to stop them or prevent their cultural assimilative education system, then that means Tibetan will have the chance to practice their language and culture. Then our border area will get more safer, I think. So last question, where do you see India's role in this?
Of course, because we been neighbor, Tibetan and India as a neighbor, we have a long historical cultural connectivity. Every primary legitimacy is from the society, from the ground. But the society is informed by culture, the culture practiced by people. The people produced by education. So from those kind of logical relation, when we successfully be able to stop the education system, that means we let our people practice our culture and the language, and our border going to be safe as in the history before. If we let them succeeded, China succeeded, then the real challenging and the security challenging going to come soon, I think.
So you think India is being proactive enough, or we're not doing enough?
We need to, I think, from my point of view, we need to step forward more. For example, in the UN, we need to clearly make statements on the China's colonial education system. Then that will increase China's sense too. Oh, if we continue this, that will increase enemy around the world, even with our neighbor.
Okay.
Yeah. The China is making such a long-term planning, the strategic planning with India. When you see their railway road, the map they're doing, I saw this clearly. The recently China saying on the India, they say, siege India without the fighting. What does that mean? You know, that's a big question, but also it's a big challenging for the India. But I think you need to have increase the solidarity with the Western country, the democratic country, and the neighbor country together strongly to increase, to prevent China's colonial boarding school and other bad policy. Then that will bring the good result in the future soon, I think.
Well, interesting perspective, Dr. Gyal Lo. Let's see what India does. Although we appear to be more driven by our own interests, and that will weigh in obviously whenever we project our Tibet policies. Dr. Gyal Lo, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Great perspective from you.
My pleasure.
That's all we have for you now on The Gist. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on social media. Thank you very much. Good night.